Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Adam from Queen City Disc Golf here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Today, I want to talk about something that I don't think anybody's really talking about, and that's variability in rim width. Now, we all know that flight numbers can vary from disc to disc, manufacturer to manufacturer, and there's no real good method of uh, specifically narrow down flight characteristics of a disc just using the flight numbers. So in my hand, I have 4 discs, putter, a mid-range, fairway, and a distance driver. Now, if you've been playing disc golf for any amount of time, you know that as the speed increases, the width of the rim increases as well. I want to look into how that rim width varies between each speed. So what is the variability of the rim width at each individual speed? Are there any variabilities from manufacturer to manufacturer? A distance driver such as this Nuke, which is a 13 speed, is going to have a lot more mass towards the outside of its rim just because of the thickness of its rim. And that's going to increase the angular momentum of a disc. Angular momentum, when the disc is spinning, is a key characteristic to stability of a disc. The more mass you can put towards the outside of the disc, the more angular momentum you can create with the same amount of spin, the more stable the disc becomes. Additionally, when you have a thicker rim, when the disc is on its downward flight, there's going to be more surface area for the wind to contact, causing the disc to fade out more. So what I did is I created a web scraping program to pull in flight speeds for different discs and manufacturers, as well as their dimensional characteristics, which has their rim width on it. And I decided to look at those characteristics of speed to rim width and the variability that exists between each manufacturer and at each speed level. I think the variability that we see in flight numbers also correlates to the variability of rim widths between discs at each speed level. So without further ado, I'll go into providing some data and some charts and discuss my findings in the rim width.
All right, this first chart is just graphing rim width by speed. So we can see the general trend that rim width does increase as speed increases, which is what we expect. And it's kind of hard to tell, but some of these darker circles just mean there's more discs with that specific rim width at a certain speed. And so what I find interesting is there seems to be a lot of variable in these rim widths and not much control either at the manufacturer or between manufacturers. As you can see, you can have a 10 speed that is the same width as a 6 speed, which could potentially have completely different flight characteristics depending on that speed. And so this was kind of just my first stab of just kind of seeing what the data look like. And you can see there's quite a bit of variability. It seems to be tighter as the speeds increases, but very wide in lower speeds. And so on this chart, what I wanted to do is just kind of show the average, median, min, and max of rim width at each speed. And it's just to kind of give a range and kind of idea of what the trends look like by rim thickness and speed. And again, you can see it's the range of rim thickness is a bit smaller as the speed increases, especially on these really high speed distance drivers compared to the lower speeds. What's interesting to me is this random 4 speed, which seems to be some UK disc golf disc labeled as a 5 speed. Never heard of it, never seen it, but it's a very interesting point here. We can also see that some of these fairway drivers tend to have a lot of discs in the lower rim widths, 7, 8, 9s, compared to some of the other speeds where the median and averages tend to be kind of right in the middle. So that's kind of interesting to see as well. But you do see the general trend that as rim thickness increase, so does speed, which is going to help with angular momentum and stability. But it does give a little bit more insights to the variability of the rim width in these discs. So when we're seeing different flight characteristics, even though it may be the same disc or the same mold, or same flight numbers across manufacturers, these rim widths can play a vital role in how the discs actually fly. So since I already had the average rim width at each speed, I wanted to compare each manufacturer's rim width at their respective speeds. So I took each disc from each manufacturer at each speed, and I compared its rim width to the average and noted if that rim width was over the average or below the average, and then just did a count by manufacturer and divided that by their total discs they have that I analyze to get a kind of percentage of how manufacturers were doing in comparison to what the average rim width was. And so some interesting things that came out of this is we see that Streamline was one of the highest percentages. All 13 of their discs that I analyzed were above the average rim width. We then have Axiom with 25 or 78% of their disc rim thickness above the average for their speed. MVP falls in third, so 35 of their discs, or 74% in total of their discs, rim widths were above the average rim thickness at each speed. We see another big name brand here, Dynamic, with almost 67% of their discs. Discmania had 40, or 62%, and Millennium kind of right behind them. Latitude 64, they're pretty good. About half of their discs, or a little more than half of their discs, were above the average rim thickness. Innova, again, right about average, so most of their discs fell right around the average rim thickness. Now, they could be, because they have a larger number, they could be influencing these averages a little bit more. Westside did pretty good, again, right around 50%, so interesting to see Latitude and Westside right around 50-ish%, where Dynamics a lot higher. Prodigy only had 45% of their discs above the average rim thickness. And so what's also interesting, kind of two other suppliers, or notable suppliers, Discraft and Casaplast, had their rim thickness at each speed below the average rim thickness at each speed. So these discs from these manufacturers tend to have smaller rim widths across the board than most others. So just some interesting key insights. Now, we are talking centimeters here. So if we look at Streamline, their average rim difference at each speed was only about 5 millimeters, but 5 millimeters in a rim could be a lot, especially in a disc where any small variation could change the flight characteristics pretty well. And when we look at Discraft, who was the lowest of these brands we looked at, they're looking at roughly 7 millimeters under the average rim thickness at each speed. The one key thing I like to look at, or the interesting point again that stuck out to me, is that the MVP brands seem to be higher on average compared to all other brands, which is also interesting because they have the overmold technology. Now, I don't know if manufacturing, they need to make wider rims to put the overmold on, but they claim the overmold technology is a denser material to help increase that angular momentum. But you're also going to increase the angular momentum with a thicker rim than average. So that brings in some questions of, is it the overmold or is it their rim thickness or both that's helping their angular momentum or their overmold technology be a little bit more stable or effective than some of the other brands?
All right, so I just went through the charts. As you can see, there's quite a bit of variability at each speed and between all the manufacturers, and this is kind of just scratching the surface. There's probably a lot more I could look into, but I just wanted to do a quick analysis of variability in rim width. Some key things to note: Discraft had smaller rims on average at each speed than most other manufacturers. MVP, Axiom, and Streamline tend to be on the higher end, which is interesting because their whole Technology behind the disc is the overmold plastic is a higher density than the core plastic, which should increase the angular momentum. But they could also be having a little bit of advantage from having a little bit thicker rims as well. Again, the thicker rims could just be part of the manufacturing process where they need a little bit thicker rim to put the overmold on. I'm not tuned in to their exact manufacturing process and all that goes on, but that could be a reason why. But it is just interesting to note. So while there is variability, all discs are going to have their own flight characteristics, not just based on the rim width. There are a lot of variables that go into it, whether that's the parting line height, the design of the bottom of the disc, how domey it is. Rim width is just one of those things that does directly affect angular momentum. So that's why I wanted to kind of take a look at that at each individual speed level. And because one of the first things everybody does when they pick up a disc is they grab it and they give it that initial field test. So you may be thinking, well, I pick up this distance driver, a fairway driver, and this rim seems smaller, too small for my hand or too big for my hand. That could be just the variability in the manufacturing across all the discs. But it is interesting to note. I would suggest if you're looking for that in-depth characteristics of all that stuff, TriDisc.com has a good database of everything. That's where I built my web scraping program to pull from. And then I was able to organize the data. Thanks again for tuning in. If you liked the video, please feel free to like and subscribe, share it with a friend. I'm going to try to do some more videos in the near future. We also have our store that'll help support us and everything that we do. Thanks again.